Welcome back, everyone, as we dive into part 2 of the Second Punic War. I'm trusting by now you have all seen it. If you haven't, please, right now, click on the link down in the description. Go over and check out OverSimplified's original content without my commentary, or watch it afterwards, but please do watch it. We want to make sure we support our original content creators as much as possible. And speaking of original content, I do have, in addition to the reaction videos, I do a lot of original content as well. You can go on the homepage of this video and you'll see a lot of those, a lot of battlefield tours, things like that. I also have a new channel that we just started about a week and a half ago called Stories of the Great War, and it's all original content centered around the First World War. A lot of stuff from France and Belgium and the Western Front, but also a lot of other things are going to be going on that channel. Regular content happening all the time. I'll put the link down in the description for that as well. And want to give a shout out to our friend Mr. Terry, because I found out that he's actually got his name appears in this second part, so I'm excited to see where that is. I don't know where in the video it is. I just know he had no idea what was happening. He said he's never spoken to the guys at OverSimplified before, which I have. I've had a few conversations with them, and they're great, and they've been very supportive of what I do, so I want to thank them for that. And let's go ahead and dive into part 2.
This video was made possible by Incogni. Use code OverSimplified in the link below for an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Also, make sure to grab our Roman console
Those are really cool
before it's too late. Don't make me
have to get one of those
time, or I'll you know what.
If you did not see part 1 of my reaction, that link is also in the description. You know what? Just read the links in the description.
Hannibal's army had survived its famous crossing of the Alps, and he was now in Italy. With Hannibal's arrival, the Roman consul Scipio hit the ground running. In typical Roman fashion, he marched his army straight at the enemy.
So a number of you have pointed out to me that this Scipio is not the same Scipio that we call Scipio Africanus. He got that name, Africanus, which basically means Scipio the African, after he wins a great victory later on in these wars. But I believe that's his son.
And Hannibal began preparing for his first combat with Rome on Italian soil. Before the battle, Hannibal wanted to inspire his men, so he staged a gladiatorial death match between captured Celt prisoners.
So the blue and the red and the whole thing. When I was a teenager, a really popular TV show, American Gladiators, that is a throwback to one of their events that they would do on American Gladiators.
The winner getting prizes and freedom. He then explained that the whole thing was a metaphor. A metaphor? For what? You! These warriors are you! You're trapped in Italy with no escape. Your only choice now is to fight and win. What about the dead guy? That's you if you don't win.
So this is a common motivational tactic that will often be used by leaders, is to basically put their men in a you can't go back situation. The one that often gets referred to is when Cortez burned his ships, and there's a lot more to that story, but the story of Cortez burning his ships when they landed in Mexico so that his men had no thought of going back and could only go forward. So that's the kind of idea we're thinking of here.
And the prizes? That's what you stand to gain by winning. And the fact that I've soiled myself in all this excitement? No, that's not part of the metaphor. Okay. Hannibal also smashed in the head of a goat. Again, for inspiration. Scipio, on the other hand, now
our idea of inspiration and theirs are a little different.
Arriving in the area, opted for the more classic route of a rousing pre-battle speech. Look at them, men. Weak, starved by the Alps, while we are the strongest military in the world. This will be easy, like 10,000 horse-sized ducks fighting a baby-sized baby. It'll be like Mike Tyson in his prime, kicking a baby. A tug of war between 10 sumo wrestlers and
a baby.
Help me out here, Ralph. A baby, sir? Yes, yes, that's it. A baby. The point is, there is absolutely no possible way we could lose a battle this easy.
So think about, and I'm not saying that this is exactly the speech he gave, but think about the opposing attitudes here. One is desperation. It's win or die. The other side is we're going to win. It's just really a matter of just taking care of business. who's more motivated to fight in that situation.
So, if everybody's ready, on my mark, charge!
That was awesome.
The Battle of Ticinus was over almost as soon as it had begun, as the Romans found themselves completely outmatched by Hannibal's famed, lightning-fast Numidian cavalry.
And keep an eye on that, because this is going to be a tactic that gets used a few times during these wars. I think that's pretty much the tactic that's going to be used in the famous Battle of Cannae, or Cannae, depending on how you pronounce it, which is just an absolute bloodbath. Victory for the Carthaginians.
A key element in Hannibal's devastating double envelopment tactics.
Double envelopment, there you go.
In the chaos, Scipio was wounded. Thankfully, according to some ancient writers, his handsome 17-year-old son,
there he is.
Scipio the Younger, saw his father fall. Scipio the Younger supposedly saved his father, and in the process, earned himself a lot of daddy's kisses. The Romans ended up fleeing the area, destroying the bridge behind them as they went. For a nation so overtly confident in victory, believing Hannibal to be an easy kill, the Romans found themselves running away with their tail between their legs.
So remember, in the first episode, we talked all about how the whole tactic here was let Hannibal suffer attrition coming through the Alps, hit him when he gets on the other side. Well, now that's failed. So what's plan B? Because you just got your butt kicked by an army that's only going to grow stronger now after this victory.
It was humiliating. And you know who thought so as well? The Celts. They began flocking to Hannibal's side.
Sometimes you have to win a victory in order to convince people to join your side. In the American Revolution, it's the victory at Saratoga for the Americans that's going to convince the French, hey, you know what, we can do this. And it's kind of part of the thought process then that Robert E. Lee has in trying to invade the North, first in the Antietam campaign and then Gettysburg, is let's prove to Europe that we can do this and that they should jump in on our side. So now Hannibal has given these people a reason to get off the fence. So that's why this battle matters so much. The whole thing's different if Rome wins, as they expected to, after Hannibal comes down out of the Alps.
As he had hoped, even Celtic troops fighting for Rome in the Roman camp began to reconsider. Man, I'm thinking we should try to join Hannibal. I hear you. Maybe we should bring him a gift. What do you think he'd like?
A head?
Oh, I know. Hey, Hannibal. We want to join your side, and we brought you a present. A gift? For me? I hope it's Roman heads. Oh, please. Oh, please be Roman heads. How did you know? Running away from Hannibal was humiliating enough, but having dozens of Romans beheaded in the night, now that's embarrassing. Ticinus had been a relatively small battle, but the psychological impact it had early on was huge, and it was only just a taste of what Hannibal was capable of.
This is why you can never take events in history out of their context, out of the before and after, because it all matters. This on its own is a small battle, and you might think, well, what's the big deal? A couple thousand on each side, it's a minor victory in the grand scheme of things. No, it's about what happened before and what happened after, and how it ties everything together and how it changes the trajectory of the events that come to follow.
Despite the shocking initial loss, however, Rome still didn't seem to fully understand the danger posed by the monster now loose in their territory. The Senate was full of excuses. It's those traitorous Celts. That's why we lost. Yeah, and it was a cavalry battle.
Find somebody to blame.
Wait until Hannibal faces our almighty legions. And our consul was bold. Once he faces our other fully follicled consul, then he'll really pee his pants. That other consul, Longus, had been in the south all this time, preparing to invade Africa. He had seen some success, even capturing Malta. But then he heard the news. Hannibal's in Italy? And I'm being ordered home? But I was going to be the big boy. I was going to invade Carthage and win the war. Well, you can be a big boy at home. No! Does somebody need a nap, sir? No!
Listen, naps are wasted on the young. You get to be in your mid-40s, naps are glorious things, and never knock a good nap. Oh, so good.
Oh, no! And so Longus brought his army on the long journey north. When he arrived in the area to decisively neutralize Hannibal, the two consuls joined their forces together, creating a double consular army. But the two consuls weren't exactly on the same page.
There you go.
Having a nice rest there, old man? I'm wounded, Longus. Pathetic. You don't understand. He's more dangerous than we thought. Maybe for you. Whoops. Listen.
And here's the problem now. You have a situation where Scipio has faced him. Now he knows what he's up against. Longus hasn't learned that lesson yet. He's coming in with an attitude. Romans don't lose to people like this. He's going to make the same mistake that Scipio made. And the same thing happens throughout history when people join late. The Americans come in 1917 during the First World War. And the French and the British and their empires have been fighting on the Western Front for 3 years. And they're telling the Americans all these lessons that they have learned, and the Americans are like, well, now we can take care of business. But they learned really, really fast that even a bloodied German army was still super tough, and they had some lessons they had to learn on their own.
We can't just march straight at him like we normally do. We need to train our men through the winter, and we'll try again in spring. Sorry,
Smart.
I don't take advice from a bowling ball. Hey, I'll kick your ass, Longus. Any day now. I'm coming. Just you wait.
I gotta say, he has stepped up the humor a couple notches in this series. It's really good.
Oh, Scipio, you feeble old man. Scipio was apparently quite cautious after his recent encounter with
Understandable.
Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait to give Hannibal a swirly.
Oh, here it is. Here it is. Let's go back.
Hannibal, while Longus, typically Roman, couldn't wait.
Mr. Terry wears nice hats. There it is, right there. Your mom asks for new videos, so I'm taking her to prom. Fart jokes forever. Average height for the time. Throwback to Napoleon. Someone's butt was here. Banksy. That's awesome. I love the Mr. Terry wears nice hats, though. That's awesome.
To give Hannibal a swirly. So who would get their way? Well, when two consuls joined their forces, it turned out the Romans had an interesting system in place. They would each take turns being the one in charge. Consul 1 would lead one day, then Consul 2 the next. Back and forth.
It's like a custody agreement.
As you can imagine, when the two consuls didn't agree, things didn't go so well. In this case, due to Scipio's injury, Longus probably assumed even more command than normal. Hannibal had Celtic spies in the Roman camp. He fully understood the Roman system and Longus's hot-headed nature, and he knew he could exploit it. For goodness sake! What's wrong, sir? I'm trying to order some pizza, but I keep getting fed all these personalized ads about being a hothead. I'm not a hothead, am I? No, sir. Look at this. Butt insurance? Who would buy butt insurance? Yeah, that sounds really stupid. Sir, it seems like a lot of data brokers have collected data on you. They could sell that data.
Here comes
to
the
Hannibal.
ad.
What? But don't worry, because you can get rid of that data with today's wonderful sponsor,
I gotta say that there are a few content creators who do the transitions and the integration of their sponsor as well as he does.
Hooray! I've been getting at you for some time to protect your personal data online. But you're a nimwit, aren't you? You didn't do it, did you? Typical. And now would you look at that? Tons of data brokers have collected a heck of a lot of your personal data and might sell it to third parties like advertisers or insurance companies without you even knowing. Ever wonder where Sally from the Butt Insurance Company got your name, number, address, social security number, and favorite color from?
And funny thing is, now as someone on YouTube, I actually get emails occasionally from companies offering to sell me information. Like they'll say, hey, we've got 6,500 names and contact information from this particular group. And it's really kind of scummy.
Probably a dirty data broker. We could painstakingly contact the hundreds of brokers that have our data and politely ask them to delete it. That process would only take the average human about 3,000 years. And that's why you need Incogni. I was shocked to find how many data brokers Incogni had tracked, potentially selling my data. But all I had to do was create an Incogni account, give them permission to work on my behalf, then sit back and let them do all the hard work for me. And since these data brokers don't stop there, Incogni will continuously work to keep my data safe with an annual plan. So if you want to protect your personal data too, go to incogni.com/oversimplified to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. That's incogni.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel. So thank you. Now, where were we? Oh yeah. Roman heads, a double consular army, and a hothead. Hannibal needed to keep smashing the Romans in battle in order to maintain the loyalty of the Celts, and so he was eager to fight another battle. The combined Roman force possibly outnumbered him, so he carefully crafted a clever trap, and he made sure to spring it while Longus was still in charge.
And this is where, again, understanding your opponent is so vitally important. If he has enough intelligence to know what kind of a guy he's facing, then that's going to dictate what his tactics might be. Maybe you draw this guy into a situation because of his overconfidence.
The plan began with his army getting an early night's sleep. All right, boys, time for lights out. Sorry, but we got a big day ahead of us. Tomorrow, we're gonna massacre the Romans. Good night, boys. Dream of revenge.
Dream of revenge.
Gorzog.
Here's the thing, though. If you've ever been a camp counselor, you know that's not how that goes. They don't just go to sleep when you tell them to. They spend half the night, especially if it's boys, making fart jokes and noises and making each other laugh, and you have to keep threatening them to get them to go to sleep.
Send out the cavalry. That night, Hannibal's Numidian cavalry made their way over to the Roman camp, arriving just before dawn. Hey, Romans! Wakey, wakey! What's going on? Hey, Longus, your butt smells like a butt. It does not! Scipio, awaken the troops. Longus, these playground insults are clearly meant to lure you out. Well, it's working.
Wisdom.
Send out the troops. Longus, it's clearly a trap. And I'm falling for it. Send out the troops. Hey, guys, wake up. You're heading out for battle. What? But we haven't had breakfast. We're skipping breakfast! I don't think you can do that. As the Romans hurried out of camp, the Numidians began luring them back to the Carthaginian camp.
Yep.
Where these gentle angels were just awakening from their slumber. Eat up, boys. We're having pancakes. While the Carthaginians were enjoying their hearty breakfast, the starving Romans were still on their way. Hurry up! We have to catch those Numidians. Hey, why have you stopped marching? Longus, there's a freezing river in front of us. Well, get your gluteus maximus in the water!
How dumb
All right,
is this?
boys, time to lather up. This oil will insulate you from the cold. It also smells like lavender. There's the Carthaginian camp. Get ready to fight, men. Sir? I think the water from the river is beginning to ice over. I can't move. Oh, I'm sorry. You thought war would be fun? Sitting around a nice hot campfire playing Truth or Dare with your friends? Welcome to the real world! Truth.
You're about to get wrecked, dude.
Who do you like? Sharon?
They're playing Truth or Dare. This is awesome.
Look, guys, the Romans are here. Having perfectly orchestrated events so that his enemy was cold, tired, and hungry, while his men were well rested and covered in oil. When the two sides engaged one another, the Romans were in no condition to fight. And the cherry on top, the previous night, Hannibal had sent out an elite force of men led by his brother to go and hide behind a bush. They suddenly sprung
They're bush
out,
camping,
encircling the exhausted Romans, who were then cut to pieces. Once again, Hannibal's superior cavalry and double envelopment tactics had flummoxed the Romans.
Blueprint for revenge. And this is going to keep on working until the Romans figure out what he's doing and figure out a way to counter it.
But the key word at Trebia was control. Hannibal used his intel on the enemy and the environment of the battlefield to carefully control the conditions of battle, creating lots of little advantages for himself that paved the way to success.
Understanding the fact that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and so you have to be able to adjust. Setting up a good plan ahead of time really matters. It matters a ton, especially when all other things are equal. The one who plans better and sets himself up for success is going to have a better chance. But then you also need to be good at adjusting on the fly once you see what your enemy's going to do.
And
He does both
concealing
well.
troops for an ambush? All of these things are what make Hannibal the genius he's remembered as today. As for Longus, he managed to escape the battlefield with a small number of troops. Disgraced, he didn't want the Senate to find out what had happened, and he began obscuring communications back to Rome. Longus, where have you been? We've been looking for you. Nowhere in particular. Longus, 30,000 men are missing. Do you know where they are? They're taking a bath. 30,000 men? All in a bath? Yes. Longus, what's under that rug? Aurora Borealis?
30,000 men?
Borealis? Oh, well, that's my consulship over. Good luck with Hannibal. Bye. Trebia had been a disaster for the Romans.
Oh.
And as even more Celts began flocking to Hannibal, Rome largely lost its control over Cisalpine Gaul. In Rome,
So Cisalpine Gaul is on this side of the Alps, and Transalpine Gaul would be on the far side of the Alps. Just Latin there. Every one of these victories not only weakens the Romans, but also adds to the number of men that Hannibal is receiving as reinforcements. So it's getting more and more one-sided against him, against the Romans.
Recency turned to alarm. Hannibal had outwitted them on their own soil and inflicted a costly defeat. But with that, Scipio and Longus's terms as consul were over. They were replaced with two new consuls, Servilius and Flaminius. The Romans may now have begun to realize the trouble they were in and the genius Hannibal had shown in invading Italy. The Romans had expected to be the ones controlling this war. Remember, they thought they were going to invade Carthage. Now their plans lay in ruins, and they were levying 11 new legions to deal with the threat.
That's a lot.
Hannibal had completely redefined the war. But
So let's talk for a second, just for those who might not be familiar with how a Roman army is made up. You know, we hear these terms like legions and cohorts and centuries and things like that. What do they all mean? So keeping in mind that anytime we talk about these numbers, that these are basically rough estimates, because once you're on campaign, these numbers change. You have attrition, you have battle, you have all these sorts of things that are happening. But a typical Roman legion would look something like this. You're going to have 10 cohorts, and a legion's going to have about 5,500 men. So this would be like a brigade to a division size in a more modern army. Again, those things vary depending. You might have 10, 15,000 men in a division in a more modern army, but or even more. But a century is about 80 soldiers led by a centurion, which, obviously 100 is what a century would be, but a cohort is made of 6 centuries, and then you're going to have about 10 cohorts in a legion. You've got reserves, light troops, cavalry, all those sorts of things, and there's a lot more to it than just this. This is kind of a simplified version, but that gives you a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about. A fully formed legion, 5,000-6,000 men. And my understanding too is that typically the first cohort in a legion is much bigger, like maybe twice as big as the other ones. So just a little added detail there.
Hannibal had a little problem of his own. Things had gone well so far, but the Celts were notoriously fickle, and Hannibal needed to ensure he maintained their alliance
keep 'em loyal.
and his base of support in Italy. Any Celts he captured fighting for Rome, he treated extremely well and allowed them to return to their homes. But the longer he hung around in their territory, eating all their food and leaving beard trimmings in their sinks, the more resentful they may become. They wanted to go south and plunder some Roman booty, and Hannibal also hoped to sway Rome's other Italian allies in the south to his side. So from here, the path was clear. Hannibal had to move south. Just one problem. There were 2 main routes Hannibal could take to move south. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly where the 2 new Roman consuls had taken fortified positions. If Hannibal tried to move on them, he'd be fighting from a disadvantaged position and could be bottled in.
And you have new consuls, so do you know anything about them? Do you know how they're going to fight, what their tactics, what their leadership style is?
There's a third option. Ooh, tell me. We could move through this vast impassable marshland flooded with dirty, stinky, disease-infested water that at times would come up to our necks. But there's no way we would attempt that, right? That'd be crazy, right?
You are the same people that just came through the Alps and lost, over half your men. So yeah, that's what you're going to do.
Hannibal? Hannibal's 4-day trek across the Arno marshlands was hell on earth. Almost as crazy as when he crossed the Alps. Imagine 3 full days, unable to sit or lie down.
Wow.
Because there's nowhere to sit or lie down. Meaning 4 full days without sleep, slugging through heavy mud. You contract cholera, your foot falls off, and Jim Bob directly in front of you won't stop pooping in your path. In fact, everybody's pooping in your path. Some delirious, sleepless men would see clumps of mud and say, man, I could just sink into that. And then they would. When pack animals died, it gave nearby men a chance to rest, but only for a few moments before they were whipped back into line. Even Hannibal himself couldn't escape the torture of it. Hey Hannibal, if we see a Starbucks, can we stop? I need to take a leak. What? Geez, Hannibal, looks like you picked up a nasty eye infection. Normally for this sort of thing, we just wash it out with some clean water. But as you can see, water everywhere.
And an eye infection on the surface doesn't sound like a bad thing, but they call this area the triangle of death for a reason. Because if you get an infection, like you get an infection in a tooth, you get an infection on your face. I had an infection under my eye at one point that lasted for a while. And that's what the doctor told me. He's like, yeah, that's a triangle of death. You need to deal with that. Because that can spread to your brain. It can spread to your heart. It can become a deadly problem.
It's full of Jim Bob's poop. No worries, Doc. I'll just take care of it myself. That'll be $3,000. When the now possibly one-eyed Hannibal and his army emerged from the swamp, they were shattered. But he had just managed to slip 50,000 men right past the Romans into rich Etrurian lands, where he could replenish his supplies, and his Celt allies could go crazy, securing Roman loot and booty. As fields and villages went up in flames, one Roman consul couldn't help but notice the hot-headed Flaminius, feeling it was his responsibility to protect these lands, rather than waiting for his co-consul to come join him, immediately left to go chase Hannibal. Now, this Flaminius was an interesting character. He was what the Romans called a new man. He came from the lower plebeian classes of Roman society, and as a result, he reportedly had kind of a screw-you attitude to the...
Not only a screw-you attitude, but he's also going to want to prove himself, and he's going to have to show that he made it on his own merits and not because of his name.
Establishment, and a big old arrogant chip on his shoulder. Picture Sid Vicious wearing a toga. That's Flaminius. And Hannibal, thanks to his spies, knew everything.
Intelligence.
Just as with Longus, Hannibal knew Flaminius was just the kind of man he could lure into a trap.
Cannot possibly overemphasize in all human history the importance of having intelligence that the other side doesn't have. Knowing your opponent, knowing where he's at, what he's doing, what his plans are, what you think his attitude might be. Huge.
Hannibal led Flaminius to the entrance of a narrow pass along the north shore of Lake Trasimene. Flaminius watched as Hannibal's army entered the pass. I've done it. I've spotted the enemy. Sir? That big follow us seems kind of like they're trying to lure you in. Yes, Gareth, and I'm taking the bait. Sir, this really seems like a trap. Yes, Gareth,
it's a trap.
And I'm falling for it. Daylight was fading, so for now, the Romans set up camp. The two armies encamped across the lake from one another, and night fell over the two camps. In the morning, Flaminius would catch up to Hannibal, and he would be the hero of Rome. For now, the Romans got nice and comfy in their beds. Good night, Flaminius. Good night, Rome. Good evening, Hannibal. During the night
vision.
Hannibal ordered total stealth. As tens of thousands of troops scaled the wooded hills above the pass, completely undetected by Rome's scouts. Let's go, girls. Flaminius took off across the lake shore to try to catch Hannibal. As he did, even the weather seemed to be on Hannibal's side. A thick fog rose from the surface of the lake, obscuring visibility. Look at this! This is perfect! The mist will obscure our approach. Hannibal will never see me coming. Sir? Why does it sound like 50,000 Carthaginians are charging down the hill towards us?
Well, not all Carthaginians, but yeah.
You mean 50,000 Carthaginians are charging right into my trap? The Romans found themselves completely hemmed in on all sides. With zero visibility in the fog, the fighting was terrifying and chaotic. Troops were pushed into the lake in their heavy armor, where they were either cut down or drowned. And Flaminius, who likely stood out like a sore thumb in his consul attire, caught the attention of one Celt warrior, with his head possibly swirling with thoughts of how the Romans had decimated his homeland. According to the ancient writers, this Celt took his chance. In the 3-hour-long massacre, 15,000 Romans were killed and an equal number captured.
This has been such a one-sided campaign so far because they keep making the same mistakes and they keep falling into the same traps. Who's going to try something different and match wits with this guy? I mean, I know who, but that's what they got to be thinking.
An entire army completely wiped out, along with their consul. During the battle, the Roman vanguard had managed to break through at the front and climbed the hill above the fog. When the mist cleared, what they saw was a blood-red lake and a sea of Roman bodies. Worse yet, when the other consuls sent cavalry to try to aid Flaminius's doomed legions, they too were caught and defeated. A double disaster.
Panic.
Rome.
He's getting closer to Rome.
Frenzy. For the second time, Hannibal had completely decimated an entire Roman army. Romans were dying by the tens of thousands. Common citizens began flocking to the city for safety. Women waited by the city gates in tears, hoping to hear news of loved ones. This one man, having just led his battered army across the Alps the previous year, now stood less than 100 miles from Rome.
And now psychological warfare starts to set in. He's won multiple victories. You're going to start, this is where he's going to start to take on mythological status. And people are going to start to see the boogeyman everywhere with Hannibal. They're going to start to wonder if anybody can defeat him. And, if he's got the gods on his side or what's going on. There's panic. There's all sorts of stuff going on that's going to complicate this.
To this point, he had been a problem. Now, Hannibal was a crisis.
Yeah. 100%.
And in a crisis, Rome took desperate measures. They actually had a system in place when dealing with an emergency of this magnitude. They would forgo their two-consul power-sharing system and instead temporarily give one man near total power and authority to be as decisive as he needed and hopefully salvage the situation. This all-powerful position in Rome's government had a name: dictator. It's actually where we get the word. But unlike modern dictators, Roman ones didn't score perfect rounds of golf or ride bears through the Siberian tundra. They held their power for just 6 months before they were required to give it up.
And this is why it was such a big deal when Julius Caesar, 200 years later, is going to be made dictator for life, because that was not how it was supposed to work.
And in Rome's hour of need, the man chosen to be dictator in 217 BC, one of the most highly esteemed members of the Roman Senate, Fabius Maximus. So how would Fabius, as dictator, confront Hannibal? Well, Fabius understood that marching all of Rome's young men straight into a one-man meat grinder was bleeding Rome dry. Hannibal was clearly too dangerous to face head-on in battle. However, he was also stuck in their territory, with dwindling manpower and forced to live off the land. It wasn't a sustainable position to be in long term, and he could only remain there
Mr. Beats Burger.
So, if Rome avoided battle with Hannibal to prevent any more crippling losses, and instead simply maneuvered around him, blocking supplies and taking out smaller contingents where possible, Hannibal would gradually become weaker, while they would gradually become stronger. And
ever heard the term Fabian strategy? Now we know where it comes from. It's a military strategy where pitched battles and frontal assaults are avoided in favor of wearing down an opponent through a war of attrition and indirection. This is how the United States wins the American Revolution. And who's it named after? Quintus Fabius Maximus, the guy we're talking about right now. This is where that idea comes from, Fabian strategy.
And so Fabius presented his new idea to the Roman Senate. Okay, guys, I have an idea. See if you can follow me here, okay? Instead of fighting Hannibal, when he approaches, we run away.
This is also the strategy that was used by the Texas army to defeat Santa Anna. Pull back, pull back, pull back, cause an army to stretch out. He's in enemy territory. He's got to worry about supplies and intelligence and being attacked, and then you strike when you can. Not popular.
Fabius's
There's no honor in
couldn't
this.
have been any less Roman.
Is the view.
Romans were meant to march headfirst into battle, not run away from it. It seemed cowardly, and Fabius was extremely unpopular.
And this is what you have to worry about is morale in that situation, because it's going to feel like you're losing because you're constantly falling back. You're giving up ground. You're allowing him to take territory. And so it requires a very coherent communication with your officers so that they understand what's happening and they can keep morale up while you're doing this.
At this point, Hannibal was continuing south. He had to stay on the move to keep his army fed, and he was still aiming to undermine Rome's alliances in the south. As he went, in a calculated display of aggression, he devastated the Roman countryside and killed many Romans, all in plain sight of Fabius and his army. We're just gonna stand here? Yes. Are you a coward? No. But Fabius, that's my farm. Well, MacDonald, thank you for your sacrifice. You're a hero now. Think of the stories you'll tell. Old MacDonald had a farm.
Yeah.
Shut up. But you know who else hated Fabius's strategy? Hannibal. He understood the danger he was in. Turning Rome's allies against her required Hannibal to keep smashing the Romans in battle. He couldn't do that if Fabius wouldn't fight him. Multiple times, Hannibal tried to goad Fabius into a fight, but Fabius wouldn't bite. Failing that, he tried to turn Rome against Fabius. According to the writer Livy, he burned down all the farms he could, but any farm he learned was owned by Fabius himself. He left well alone. Hey, Fabius, why isn't he burning down your farm? You got some sort of a...
Hannibal is not only a brilliant tactician, he's also a pretty darn good politician, too, and a PR guy. He knows what he's doing.
Secret deal with him? What? Of course not.
Hey, Hannibal! What? Burn my farm too, please! What? Burn my farm too, please! No! Remember our secret deal!
Well, you got to admit, he's a genius. Hannibal's problem, however, was that he had to stay on the move to keep supplying his army from the local lands. At one point, he entered Campania, one of the richest regions of Italy, great for resupplying, and great for showing up Fabius in front of Rome's South Italian allies.
Capua.
But he was caught in a valley, and Fabius quickly moved to block his escapes. Haha! We've got him! After he's used up all the valley's supplies, he'll starve. Sir? What are all those lights leaving the valley? Is he trying to escape? Lights in plain view. Well, that's a trap if I've ever seen one.
And we're falling for it!
Here's the problem. When the trap works well too many times, you can fall into the opposite problem and say, well, that's obviously a trap, so we're not going to bite. And this is where the psychological aspect of Hannibal's victories is starting to play tricks on the Roman minds.
Suspecting a trap, Fabius refused to budge. But other Romans in the valley rushed to confront Hannibal, only to find the Carthaginian army was actually just a herd of oxen with
That's
torches
fantastic.
tied to their heads. They then found themselves caught in an ambush. With the Romans distracted, Hannibal's army was able to slip away into the night, unopposed. Classic Hannibal. For all his inaction, the dissatisfied Romans mockingly dubbed him Fabius the Delayer. But the thing is, Fabius's strategy was probably the best thing he could have done. He was right that constant encounters with Hannibal were bleeding Rome dry, and the time he took allowed Rome some breathing room to recover their forces when they desperately needed to, while putting Hannibal into an increasingly more difficult position. Modern historians view Fabius's strategy as generally a good idea.
Yeah.
To this day, the act of not engaging an enemy, but instead gradually wearing them down, is still referred to as the Fabian strategy.
And this is actually an image from the night that bin Laden was killed. Historic
But when
image.
Fabius's term finally came to an end, the Senate couldn't have been happier. It was time to start fighting again. However, they probably had a little chat about how they were going to go about it. See, Hannibal's tactics up until now had been very sneaky. Or, if you're a Roman, you might say dishonorable. I'm sick of it. Every time we try to take this guy down, we march straight at him. But then, oh no, Hannibal's hiding in a bush.
And this is the thing. It seems kind of silly. Obviously, you're going to do anything you can to win, but this has been a common argument is when people do something that hasn't been done before, or when they do something that you don't think is how it should be done, people cry foul and say, well, that's not fair, that's not right, that's dishonorable. Using gas in warfare in World War I, using shotguns was seen that way, dropping bombs from airplanes. These are all things that the first time they were done, people were like, no, you can't do that.
Hannibal's got 30,000 men up a tree. At this point, I'm not convinced my wife isn't just Hannibal wearing a disguise. Cooey. Look, this time, we obviously have to switch something up. Now granted, we're Roman, so we're gonna march straight at him without thinking. That can't be helped. It's in our blood. But I have a proposition. This time, when we march straight at him, we do it with a massive army. I'm talking like 80,000 men. It won't matter what kind of shenanigans he pulls.
This is going to be
He can
Kane.
hide in all the bushes he wants. There's no way he can possibly beat off 80,000 men. Grow up! You know what I mean? And so it was with
I thought the same thing. Like I said, the humor's fantastic in this one. This is definitely one of the better written episodes he's ever had.
2 new consuls. Rome put together a massive army, the biggest Rome had ever fielded, to put Hannibal away once and for all. To gather the men required, 2/3 of them ended up being completely inexperienced. But how much experience does it take to be expendable war fodder? As this massive army set out in the summer of 216 BC, the Romans knew they needed to win this battle. Just one victory over Hannibal would likely be enough to end his entire campaign. And this time, their overwhelming manpower gave them confidence they could do it. Hannibal had taken position at the town of Cannae, where he had captured an important Roman supply depot. With Fabius gone, Hannibal knew a battle was likely coming, and he was eager to fight it on his terms.
Be ready, because you cannot overstate what a massive historical moment this is. This is one of the most decisive and horrifying defeats that the Romans ever suffer in their history. This is an absolute destruction by a smaller force, unlike anything we've seen.
But when his men looked out at the Roman camp, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That army's huge! There's no way we can possibly beat off all these men. How are we gonna beat off all of these men? You know what I mean. I think he's right, Hannibal. Hannibal is then said to have replied, Gisco, my friend, don't worry. There may be a lot of them, but amongst their ranks, there's not a single man named Gisco. This joke was apparently so funny that his officers began to laugh and laugh. And when his men in the camp heard the laughter, they were like, hey,
We got
they're
this.
laughing. I guess that means we're gonna win the battle.
Confidence.
Hooray! As for the Romans, the consuls were another pairing between an inexperienced hothead and a wise scholar. Although the main historian from this era was good friends with Paulus's family, so take that with a grain of salt. On his
We talk about this all the time. Anytime we are reading history, we have to consider who's writing it, what their biases are, what their purpose is in writing it, What are they hoping to accomplish? What are they trying to communicate through what they're writing? And keep that in mind and filter all the information through those lenses.
His day of command, the rash and hasty Varro, despite the apparent pleas from Paulus, sent the army out for battle. And when Hannibal saw this, he did the same.
Yep.
And here comes
Envelop.
the single
Double
largest
envelopment.
battle of the Second Punic War, and one of the most renowned battles in history.
Yep.
The infamous Battle of Cannae. In all the pre-battle maneuvering, Hannibal was able to ensure his army was fighting from the south. This meant the seasonal dust-carrying winds were to his back and blowing directly into the faces of the Romans. Like I said, control.
Yep.
After 2 years in Italy, Hannibal's infantry had dwindled to about 40,000. The Romans possibly outnumbered him 2-1. Their army was so big that their maniples stretched far deeper than they normally would. The Romans planned to charge Hannibal's thin, weak line like a battering ram and break it. They also chose a narrow battlefield in the hopes it would prevent Hannibal's far superior cavalry from being able to outmaneuver them. They wanted an honorable battle where pure strength rather than trickery would decide the outcome.
But you're dealing with a force for Hannibal that are battle hardened, that have won victories before. You're dealing with a largely inexperienced new army on the Roman side, led by men who haven't led in big battles before.
If Hannibal had his say, however, trickery might end up having a lot to do with it. He ordered his line to position themselves as an outward bulge, with his weakest troops at the very center. Just behind them, out of sight from the Romans, stood the elite Libyan infantry, waiting for their moment to strike. The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center.
There's so many times in history that what starts out as an advantage and what starts out as winning actually ends up working against you. The Battle of Hastings, for example, where you have the English holding a shield wall and winning the battle and on high ground until the enemy attacking them breaks and they counterattack and get drawn in, and that's when the tide of the battle turns. This is exactly what Hannibal intended by putting his weakest troops at the center. They're going to break, they're going to draw the Romans in, and where you couldn't get around them because of the narrowness of the terrain, you're creating a natural ability to get around them.
Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle. But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass, trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians.
If you've watched Game of Thrones, and toward the end, there's the Battle of the Bastards, and you see that Jon Snow's men eventually get completely surrounded, and they're so tightly packed that they're like struggling even to be able to breathe, and most of the army is just neutralized because they're in the center and they can't fight. They're just surrounded by their own men. Think of that, but on a much, much bigger scale. That's what's starting to happen here.
They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you. A military general's wet dream, the total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position.
Brilliant.
This was the genius of Cannae. And with that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves.
That's the thing. I mean, it is an absolute just horror show. Most of your men can't even fight. Only the guys on the front lines. I tell you who does a really good job of describing this is Dan Carlin. And if you're into podcasts, Dan Carlin's podcasts are absolutely phenomenal. They're my favorite by far. The way he can paint a picture for you, and when he describes this, he does such a great job of just describing what an absolute horror show this must have been for the Romans.
The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured. Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal. Many high-ranking Romans met their end at Cannae. Paulus, for one, but also 80 senators and more.
80 senators died in this battle. 80 senators. This is like decapitation of the Roman government.
It's been estimated that 20% of Rome's male population, aged 18 to 50, died at Cannae. This was it.
Think about that. 1/5 of your military age population dead in one battle. The population's much smaller then. That's why this is such a massacre. I mean, these are numbers of dead that are rarely seen in a single day any time in history, especially in ancient history. It cannot be overstated what a one-sided debacle this was on behalf of Hannibal against the Romans.
Hannibal's vengeance. The stunned Carthaginians, as they searched for their own survivors among the dead, couldn't believe the sight of it. An estimated 30,000 gallons of blood now lay spilled on the battlefield. Rome's defeat at Cannae sent shockwaves throughout Italy. Just as Hannibal had hoped, most of southern Italy now defected to his side, including the second largest city on the peninsula. Wow, Hannibal, this is incredible. What could possibly come next? Next? Jim Bob. I've killed 150,000 Romans. I've turned her allies against her. That's it. That's vengeance. So let me tell you what comes next.
Don't go back.
Rome surrenders. Their territories are reduced. We recover our lost islands. And Carthage dominates the Mediterranean once again. But sir, what if they don't surrender? Jim Bob, did you miss what just happened? Of course they're gonna surrender. Throughout his campaign, Hannibal had shown himself to be very adept at reading the Roman mind. But if he now thought that Rome might surrender, it was the first time he severely underestimated them. And he was about to discover an extremely inconvenient fact about Rome. Rome never surrenders. At a Roman survivors' camp near Cannae, one young officer overheard some troops discussing how they would flee Rome. Drawing his sword, he threatened to cut down any man that would abandon Rome in its hour of need. That officer was Scipio the Younger. But soon enough, the Romans would come to call him Scipio Africanus, the hero of Rome.
So there is a part 3 coming. He said he just worked on it, so I think he just started working on it, so it's probably gonna be a little while before we get it. But man, that was fantastic. Oversimplified, you have outdone yourself this time. So good. The humor was great. The information was great. The story was well told. The information, all of it, top notch. So I hope you guys will definitely keep supporting Oversimplified. Watch all their videos, subscribe, buy the plushies, whatever we need to do to get this guy making more content, because it's so good. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember those links I mentioned down below. I'll throw some up on the screen as well. Check out my new channel, all original content on First World War. New content coming every week on that channel. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.